I hereby declare curfew in Juba as to be observed from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
South Sudan declares a curfew after overnight clashes between rival soldiers. South Africa unveils Mandela Unity Statue on Reconciliation Day. And reaching out, the Central African Republic's leader considers amnesty to rogue militias to end sectarian violence. Welcome to Africa Live. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Also ahead in the next 1 hour. A bailout for Egypt. 2014 holds glad tidings to the North African country. And China's Guangzhou ready for German giants Bayern Munich in Club World Cup clash. South Sudanese President Salva Kiir imposed a curfew following overnight clashes in the capital Juba. Salva Kiir said the violence was an attempted coup but assured citizens that the government is in control. Now fighting broke out following tension after President Salva Kiir sacked his deputy Riek Machar in July of this year. Wazir Hamsir tells us more.
By late mid-morning, the sound of gunfire and artillery fire had subsided in the capital Juba. The overnight fighting seemed to pit soldiers from President Salva Kiir's Dinka tribe against those from the Nuer tribe of former Deputy President Riek Machar.
The SPLM is fully committed to the peaceful transfer of power, to the peaceful and democratic transfer of power, and will never allow political power to be transferred through violence. In response to the criminal acts of yesterday committed by this disgruntled group, and for the sake of the security and safety of our citizens, I hereby declare curfew in Juba as to be observed from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. starting from 16th of December 2013 until further notice.
Salva Kiir Mayardit fired Machar after he expressed interest to contest in the 2015 presidential elections against him. The South Sudanese president blamed troops loyal to Machar for the violence. He also said groups within the country's security forces are plotting a coup.
Yesterday at about 6:30 p.m., during the closing of the SPLM National Liberation Council meeting, an unidentified person near Nyakuran Cultural Center released gunshots in the air and escaped. This was followed later by an attack at the SPLA General Headquarters near Juba University. By a group of soldiers allied to the former Vice President Dr. Riek Machar and his group. These attacks continued until this morning. However, I would like to inform you all, my dear citizens, that your government is in full control of the security situation in Juba.
SPLA spokesman Philip Panyang also sought to reassure citizens.
The SPLA is assuring the public that your army is in control of the situation. Secondly, we call upon the civil population to return back to their houses, remain calm. The fighting was only in the military barracks and did not spill over to the residential area.
Several people have been reported wounded and hundreds have sought refuge at the UN mission in Juba. Kiir and Machar are from rival ethnic groups which have clashed in the past. Wazir Khamsin, CCTV.
Well, let's get more on that development now in South Sudan. We're joined here in studio by John Gashia, media political analyst. John, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live now. What is your assessment, what is your reading of the unfolding situation in South Sudan?
One, I would say it was not unexpected. It has taken a little too long. The showdown between the different factions within the SPLM were going to come to a head. Now, in what form and what nature, that's what everybody was asking. But it was not unexpected.
It was not unexpected, though, and President Salva Kiir did mention that he had foiled an attempted coup. But what about the other dissenting voices within South Sudan?
Yes, the debate is on. Is then President Salva Kiir the inheritor of the John Garang mantle? Is he a Democrat? Is he willing to open up space? That is a big question. Now, the group that he says that we are perhaps behind a coup have been trying to get the crown to say that they represent the real SPLM. Now, that is not necessarily true. You have to understand that Salva Kiir was John Garang's lieutenant. He was a chief of staff. He was his deputy for a long time. Now, the other group, even though fairly close to John Garang, has also had been infiltrated by what I would call power play and people who were ambitious. And I think you have two factions.
Right.
And one faction is fairly ambitious, so to speak, and I think they had underrated the president currently. And what we have now is now the clash, as it were, to settle then who then inherits the mantle of John Garang.
It was not a totally unexpected move there, in your words earlier on, though, but how long had the dissent been brewing within the political sphere?
Immediately after the late John Garang died, and perhaps even prior to that. For a lot of people might not recall, just before the peace process, in 2004, there was a very serious showdown between the then John Garang and Salva Kiir. And it was kind of patched up for the sake of the peace agreement in 2005. But immediately John Garang died, Salva Kiir took over. There were certain sections that felt that perhaps Salva wasn't really the right person, so to speak. And it's been persistent over the last 8 years. It's only now that over the last 1 year, I think the situation has kind of unfolded rather fast. And I think this had to happen. The key, perhaps, thing was the cabinet reshuffle, because all along,
right,
the other group that felt Salva wasn't the right person had kind of tried him, had kind of provoked him. And I think what you're seeing is the president saying, perhaps I've had enough, and it's about time that perhaps he asserted himself.
We saw the president coming on television earlier on to assure the nation that everything was under control there. Moving forward, though, what kind of South Sudanese politics are we likely to see?
Yeah. I think what we are most likely going to see, we're going to see an assertive president right now. And I think we're also going to see a more assertive opposition. Now, whether that opposition will be within the SPLM or perhaps will move more to the other, which was, I would call, a fairly weak opposition, and strengthen that. That's another matter. But I could certainly say that the South Sudanese political scene will have to change.
All right, John Gashia, we'll leave it there for the moment. Media political analyst joining us here on Africa Live. Thank you for your update. Well, recently, Sudan announced a major cabinet reshuffle, South Sudan, I beg your pardon. And in an exclusive interview with CCTV's Girum Shala, the Sudanese ambassador, that's the Republic of Sudan, ambassador to Ethiopia, Abdel Rahman Sir Al-Khatim, explained the reasons behind the reshuffle and Sudan's position on the construction of Ethiopia's Renaissance Dam.
It aims to inject new blood in the system, in all organs of the political system, the government, the party, and the parliament, etc., and to keep the momentum of the development in action.
What is the current position of Sudan on the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam?
We are consistent in our position at all stages. Planning and implementing will continue to be for the idea. We'll continue to support the project because we believe It is of benefit to us in Sudan as well as to Ethiopia and Egypt. It is not a political position. It is a position built on our conviction.
Kirum Chala there speaking to the ambassador of the Republic of Sudan to Ethiopia. Now we'll take a short break here on Africa Live, but coming up on the program. South Africa unveils Mandela Unity Statue on Reconciliation Day. To stay with us. South Africans have been celebrating Reconciliation Day just hours after former President Nelson Mandela was laid to rest at a state funeral in the Eastern Cape. A few thousand people turned out at the Union buildings for the event, where President Jacob Zuma unveiled a 9-meter statue. CCTV's Guy Henderson reports from Pretoria.
Okay.
Arms spread wide and keeping watch over the city skyline. This was an unveiling planned months ago, but now, on a day created by Nelson Mandela to celebrate a country's togetherness, a fitting final tribute after 10 days of official mourning.
This denotes that South Africa is not a democratic country. He is embracing the whole nation. He is advancing to the nation to say, let us come together, let us unite. We need to reflect that unity.
A nation that responded in kind. Through 2 decades since Mr. Mandela dragged the country back from near civil war, and now, after his death, one that has been galvanised again. A few thousand here, but last week, as he lay in state, 100,000 at least, all wanting to say their thanks.
Now, to millions of South Africans, Nelson Mandela now stands as a symbol of everything this country has achieved and many of the things that it still strives for. And the African National Congress, as the ruling party, has always had a very strong claim to that symbol. But now, as people begin to look ahead again, and with elections just a few months away, that may no longer be a given.
Forward to expropriation of land without compensation. Forward.
Next year we'll see an unprecedented number of challenges, amongst them Julius Malema's economic freedom fighters, opponents who may claim to share many of the ideals that Mr. Mandela and his party fought for, but increasingly challenge the methods to reach them. With high unemployment and a huge gap between rich and poor, the economic future of this country in particular is becoming contestable ground.
Everybody's going to try and claim to be the true heir to what Mandela represented. And of course the ANC's got a particular difficulty at the moment because Zuma is facing allegations about enrichment by himself and his family at state expense. And this, his behaviour potentially presents a quite unfavourable contrast.
A salute for a man whose indelible legacy is in no doubt. But as campaigning begins in his shadow, so too does debate about how to carry that forward. Guy Henderson, CCTV, Pretoria.
And as South Africa celebrates Reconciliation Day, CCTV's Femeda Miller has visited a Johannesburg area once known as Fietas. She explores how far residents there have come to pursuing Nelson Mandela's ideal of a non-racial society.
Fietas, as this area is popularly known, is one of the oldest communities in the western suburbs of Johannesburg. It was also one of the first multiracial communities established under the government of Paul Kruger in 1893. However, it was later destroyed by forced removals as a result of the Group Areas Act. The majority of the inhabitants moved to Indian, coloured and black townships between 1956 and 1977, and the area was declared white. One of those people was Yusuf Tara Sidat, who moved to Klip River just outside Johannesburg.
We didn't know where to go to. We are being harassed, you know, and we are traumatized, and we have little children with us. That where are we going to go to? Because Lenasia wasn't an option for us.
His cousin Ibrahim Ahmad faced a similar fate and moved out in 1981. However, he returned to the area following the establishment of South Africa's first democratic government 13 years later. While people of any race can live in the area now known as Pageview, Ahmad says he's not found the same unity that existed when he first lived here.
In those days, there was much more unity amongst the people. It was obviously a different area then and now. If you give me the comparison of that area now, obviously I would prefer that, because it was such a different life. It was so beautiful.
Neighbour and friend for over 30 years, Johan Klaassen benefited from Fitas being declared whites only. When many whites moved out in 1994, he stayed on.
I mean, the Muslim people are religion people. I'm a reborn Christian, so I can get on with a religion. I've got a Quran in my house. I know what my Bible and the Quran say. So, you know, that's the way we carry on, and that's how I felt. You know, I mean, there's no difference between us.
While people here may live side by side, the neglect of the area has led to concerns around safety.
I think the government can still tighten up on security and things like that, because if you look at our homes, those days were very simple. You know, you could kick my door down, and yet we never had those problems. Today you have security, and yet you are not safe.
This generation of residents say all they can do is pass on the baton of developing a non-racial society to their children. Famida Miller, CCTV, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, Famida Miller is joining us now live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Famida, 10 days of mourning, is that officially over now?
Beatrice, well, those 10 days of mourning have indeed come to an end when former President Nelson Mandela passed away on the 5th of December. President Jacob Zuma announced it would be a 10-day period of mourning, which culminated in the laying to rest of Nelson Mandela in his home village in the Eastern Cape on Sunday. So flags that have been flying at half-mast have now been raised once again. And also on Sunday, we saw shops closed in honor and respect of Nelson Mandela. And on Monday, we do see people trickling in to Vilakazi Street, where Nelson Mandela once lived, as well as his home in Houghton. Smaller numbers compared to the last 10 days, but people still going through to show their respect. And ultimately, that 10-day period of mourning has now officially ended with the unveiling of a new Nelson Mandela statue, a 9-meter tall statue at the Union Buildings in Pretoria. Beatrice.
Famida, that statue that you talk about, that though, how does that differ from the other Nelson Mandela statues already in South Africa?
Well, Beatrice, this is a 9-meter tall statue, as I'd mentioned, at the Union Buildings, and President Jacob Zuma was at the unveiling of the statue, and he specifically pointed out the differences of the statue from many others. What we've seen in the past is often Nelson Mandela's arm raised in a fist in the traditional struggle salute of the African National Congress. Well, this time, Nelson Mandela stands with his arms outstretched, and President Jacob Zuma said that was indicative of him embracing the country, embracing the nation. And Pitika Ntuli, the sculptor of the statue, said it had been designed specifically for his arms to be outstretched, essentially calling to embrace a world that, or asking for the world to embrace a South Africa that was still struggling to deal with, still struggling to reconcile with its past. So those are the key differences. We still see the footwork very much the same. Nelson Mandela's one foot in front of another, ultimately just showing him always moving. Those are the main differences between the ones we saw in the past. And this was just a last symbol of the former president. South Africa today also celebrated Reconciliation Day, and the president saying the statue, of course, just being a symbol of the unifying factor that Nelson Mandela was.
All right, CCTV's Famida Miller joining us there from Johannesburg. Thank you. In the meantime, in Cape Town, there has been an increase in the number of tourists converging in the city's townships. Their goal, to learn more about the legacy of Madiba and what he means to South Africa. CCTV's Travis Andrews tells us more.
The death of Nelson Mandela has been one of the most significant periods in the history of South Africa. It's the moment when the country bids an emotional farewell to its first democratically elected president. The gravity of this historical period can also be felt in the country's townships, when Nelson Mandela fought tirelessly to liberate oppressed South Africans from the shackles of apartheid. In Cape Town, that legacy is being remembered fondly, no more so than by tourists who are converging on some of the local townships to hear more about the life and times of Madiba.
After the death of Madiba, there have been a lot of people wanting to come and see the township because Mandela lived in the townships. And most of the struggles which are shown on TV, things he did and people, what they were doing when they were protesting for him to come out of prison were done in the township.
This boom of township tourism has led to more and more tourists wanting to be part of the moment in time when this country reflects on the contribution Nelson Mandela gave to freedom and equality for all. There are many tourists who come here on a daily basis to get a taste of a bit of township life, but since the news of the death of Nelson Mandela, the story that's being told here has gained an even more profound significance. That's because the struggle icon's legacy is truly universal. He's as much revered in other countries as he is here. And for many visitors, they've come to witness his legacy as a liberator firsthand.
It is interesting because I come from Iceland, which is all over across the world. And death of Nelson Mandela was all over our news as well. Before I came here, I didn't know much about Mandela. But we've been learning a lot since we came here, and it's incredible to see. And today we're here in the township to learn about the change of what he has done to the community, and it's incredible.
I think for tourists it's a unique moment because now he's dead. Everybody's remembering what he's doing. Everybody's really taking a moment to consider what he's contributed to this country, and we are now experiencing what all this is about, and this is great for us here.
Since the passing of Nelson Mandela, many people have reflected on what he meant to the country and how sorely he will be missed. For the many tourists who are making their way to the townships, that monumental loss is becoming abundantly clear. Travis Andrews, CCTV, Cape Town.
And you're watching Africa Live. Coming up. Reaching out, the Central African Republic's leader considers amnesty to rogue militias to end sectarian violence. And let's now head to the Central African Republic, where the interim leader, Michel Djotodia, is weighing a possible amnesty for militias involved in Christian-Muslim violence that has killed hundreds of people in exchange for their disarmament. The country has been paralyzed since Djotodia's mainly Muslim Seleka rebels seized power in March, but has since lost control of it. A Christian militia group calling itself the Youth of the Anti-Balaka Revolution reportedly called upon its members to observe an immediate ceasefire to give peace talks a chance. Djotodia confirmed on Saturday the group was demanding inclusion in the transitional government he leads. In a sign of continued instability, Djotodia dismissed 3 members of government on Sunday, including the Security Minister Joshua Binoa. Meanwhile, France's foreign minister said Sunday his country will ask for more help from European partners to bolster its peacekeeping mission in the Central African Republic. France has deployed 1,600 troops, but its foreign minister Laurent Fabius said violence could resume in a worsening humanitarian situation for tens of thousands of refugees.
We ask not to be alone in this. First, there are 6,000 Africans. Then there are the Europeans, who some say are not present. I would not mind if they were more visible. The Polish will be helping us logistically, though. as well as Britain, Germany, Spain and Belgium. Tomorrow, I'll go to the EU Council of Foreign Ministers and will ask for stepped-up, more robust aid, including on the ground.
Meanwhile, more African Union troops have started arriving in the Central African Republic to boost the UN-backed peacekeeping force. The 3,000-strong African Union force, currently known by its French acronym FOMAC, will double in the coming weeks to 6,000. Now, France also has 1,600 troops on the ground already. But whether the joint African Union and French intervention force can stop the chaos and sectarian killings remains uncertain, as CCTV's Kate Parkinson reports from the capital, Bangui.
FOMAC forces patrol the streets of the Central African Republic's capital, Bangui. Their mission this morning is to rescue a government minister from his home. Rank offers no protection here. The minister says he feels unsafe in a conflict that has blurred the lines between enemy and friend.
The Seleka went to my home and they pillaged and stole everything. But now it is anti-Balaka in the area and they tried twice to kidnap me.
The African Union and French forces are here to disarm the militias. Both the predominantly Muslim Seleka rebels who ousted the president in a coup earlier this year and the so-called anti-Balaka Christian militia which sprung up to oppose them. Killings have slowed in the areas patrolled by international troops, but revenge attacks do still happen on an almost daily basis. This man was killed by a mob right outside the airport, where the French and FOMAC troops are based. His attackers said he was a colonel in the Seleka who'd killed civilians.
The biggest difficulty here is that we don't have an enemy that we can clearly identify, because all those carrying weapons are civilians wearing civilian clothes. So it's not easy for us to tell the difference between civilians with weapons and the civilians without weapons. This operation is extremely difficult because the people are mixed together with the civilian population.
Members of the transitional government say they're also committed to ending the violence, although it's not entirely clear how they plan to do it.
The intercommunity violence is a crisis that we all regret, because the Christians and the Muslims have always lived in harmony. And today, because of the violence committed by the ex-Seleka, there was a feeling of vengeance, which unfortunately took a religious dimension. But the government has the mission to do everything possible to stop this violence.
That's easy to say, but much harder to do when the Prime Minister is currently running his government from the airport. Because despite the presence of French and African Union forces here in the Central African Republic, the mob violence and ongoing revenge attacks means it's too dangerous for him to leave. Kate Parkinson, CCTV, Bangui, in the Central African Republic.
The retrial of Egypt's former President Hosni Mubarak continued from Saturday to Monday. For 3 sessions, the court would have heard the testimony of top security aides, but not all of them showed up. Mubarak and his 2 sons are facing charges of corruption and abuse of power. Adel Mahroui has more.
Another round of sessions for Egypt's trial of the century held without broadcast. The court banned media from publishing the details of these sessions, naming, quote, a threat to national security. Top security aides, including Mubarak's chief of staff, Sami Anan, are on the witnesses list this week. On Saturday, the court listened to the former defense minister Marshal Hussein Tantawi, the man who led Egypt's transition after Mubarak stepped down.
Tantawi attended as expected. I can't talk about the details, but all I can say is that the prosecution's evidence is falling apart one after the other, and we're getting closer to being proven innocent.
This was the second testimony for Tantawi in this case. In the first trial, he disregarded the possibility of using live ammunition from police troops and stressed that he never heard Mubarak order any violence against the January protesters.
After the Muslim Brotherhood are exposed, we now know who are behind all the wrongdoings that took place since January. Mubarak is innocent. It's only a matter of time to prove it.
On Sunday, General Sami Anan, Mubarak's chief of staff, gave his testimony. The Defense Ministry notified the court that Hamdi Badin, a prominent army general, will not attend to Monday's session for purposes of national security. Badin is currently the defense attaché in Egypt's embassy in China. The trial has been delayed for a third round of closed sessions from January 11 to 13th. The Chief of National Security Bureau and the Chief of Intelligence have been called for testimony in these sessions.
Some reports say that Mubarak is planning to stay at the military hospital after the trial ends. The former president has refused friends' requests to visit him until he's proven innocent. But a final verdict is not expected before March. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
A photo exhibition documenting the 50th anniversary of Kenya-China diplomatic relations was launched at the Kenyatta International Conference Center in Nairobi on Monday. Now, Kenya's Cabinet Secretary for Information, Communication and Technology, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, was there and thanked the Chinese media based in Kenya for helping build understanding between Kenyans and Chinese.
Looking back at 50 years of diplomatic ties, at the opening ceremony of the photo exhibition, Kenya's Cabinet Secretary for Information, Communication and Technology, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, the Chinese ambassador to Kenya, Mr. Liu Guangyan, and other delegates. The exhibition has more than 70 photos on display, a vivid reflection of Kenya's ties with China, which stretch back over half a decade. More than 600 years ago, the Chinese navigator Zheng He visited Kenya 4 times during his 7 voyages to the Western Oceans. This marked the start of China's exchanges with the East African nation. But it was on December 14, 1963 that China and Kenya established diplomatic relations, 2 days after Kenya gained independence. Today, their cooperation spans politics, economics, education, culture, tourism and media. Nairobi is the regional base of many Chinese media outlets, who Dr. Matiang'i says play an important role in building ties.
The knowledge and information a lot of Chinese people have back at home on the great wildebeest migration, Kenyan tourism products, and a number of aspects of this country has been passed to them through CCTV Africa. And I love the professionalism with which CCTV Africa has been doing this. And we want to support them so that you can inform the Chinese population more about our country, and you can inform our country more about China. Because really, the media, other than entertaining, should also inform and educate. And CCTV Africa is doing a fantastic job of all 3 of them.
Clementine Logan, CCTV.
Let's turn our attention now to matters African business with Ramanyang. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up on Biz Africa tonight.